The match field on Senior Archivist Velu Tarn's screen had been blinking for 9 seconds, and in 9 seconds, it had never once blinked like this. It read, "No match. Not unknown. Not pending. No match." In the flat gray letters the registry reserved for objects that did not exist. Tarn pressed the panel again, because a being who had catalogued 41,000 hulls did not trust a single reading. The deep scan ran a second time. The contact sat at the edge of the Osun Reach, 2 light minutes off the survey buoy, holding a stable heading toward the inner lanes, 1,900 meters long, charcoal hull, no transponder, no registry beacon, no drive signature the registry had ever logged in its 800-year history. No match. She had built that history herself, or much of it. The Tesserine Registry was not a navy, and had never wanted to be one. It was a library with weapons. Every warship that had ever crossed Tesserine space had been measured, named, filed, and ranked, and that file was the Empire's true power. You did not fight a fleet you had already weighed to the gram. You simply told it the number it had been assigned, and it understood, and it left. 300 years since the last shot fired in anger. 300 years of the catalog doing the work that guns used to do. The contact did not understand the number, because the contact had not been assigned one. "Run it against the dead files," Tarn said. Her assistant, a younger archivist named Pel Osso, was already running it against the dead files. The dead files held every hull the registry had ever destroyed, scrapped, or watched die. 40,000 entries of ships that no longer existed, kept because the dead were easier to identify than the living. A hull's death changed it less than its life did. "No match in the dead files," Pel said. His voice had gone careful, the way a voice goes careful near a fire. "Run it against the myth files." The myth files were a joke. They held the ships from old folklore, the impossible hulls from songs, the vessels that grandmothers swore had passed over their colonies when the lights went out. Nobody ran the myth files. Tarn ordered it run, because she had run out of files that were real. No match in the myth files. The contact crossed the survey buoy's inner ring, and did not slow. The buoy pinged it on every channel the registry knew, in every language the registry had ever recorded, with the formal Tesserine hailing protocol that had ended 40 wars without firing. The protocol asked one thing: identify your vessel and receive your number. It was not a courtesy. It was the Empire's whole method, distilled to a single sentence. "Tell me what you are, and I will tell you what you may do." The contact answered nothing. Tarn had seen ships refuse to answer before. Pirates refused. Raiders refused. The half-mad cult fleets out past the Reach refused, until the registry read them their number and they remembered they were afraid. Silence was not new. Silence was a category, and the category had a response, and the response had never failed. She keyed it now. The buoy escalated to second protocol, which was not a question, it was a sentence. It transmitted the contact's measured dimensions, its mass, its drive class, and the rank the registry would assign such a hull, if such a hull existed, followed by the standing order that any vessel of that rank submit to inspection, or be filed as hostile, and weighed accordingly. The number the buoy generated was the highest the catalog could produce. The registry's scale ran from 1 to 900, where 900 meant a ship so dangerous that the Empire would spend a province to be rid of it. In 800 years, the catalog had assigned 900 exactly twice, and both times the Empire had paid the province, and both times it had been judged a bargain. The buoy looked at the charcoal hull, ran the math had always run, and refused to print a number at all. The field where the rank should go came back blank. Not 900. Blank. The scale did not reach the thing it was looking at. Pel made a small sound, not quite a word. Tarn did not look at him. She was watching the contact's heading refine itself, degree by degree, until it pointed at exactly one place. Not the colonies, not the shipyards. The contact had set its nose on Tessaris itself, the archive world, the heart of the catalog, the planet that held every file the Empire had ever written. 60 light hours out, closing at a velocity that the registry's own propulsion files said was not survivable by any crude hull they had ever measured. The contact was crude. The deep scan said so. It read warmth where warmth should be, the slow heat bloom of living beings moving through a living ship. It read them moving without panic, in patterns the registry recognized from its own service crews, the calm grid walk of people who had done a thing 1,000 times and expected to do it 1,000 more. It was the wrong question, and Tarn knew it was the wrong question, and she could not yet say why. The registry had spent 800 years asking what ships wanted: tribute, passage, surrender, revenge. Every want had a file, and every file had an answer. The catalog did not work because it knew what ships could do. It worked because it knew what they wanted, and a thing that wanted could be bargained with, weighed, and filed. You could not weigh a hull's guns until you knew what its captain feared losing. The charcoal hull wanted nothing the buoy could read. "Wake the High Registrar," Tarn said. "Wake all of them, and get me the survey footage. Every frame the buoy has of that hull. I want to see it." The footage came up on the long wall. The buoy's optics were old but honest, and they showed the contact in hard light against the black. And for the first time, Velu Tarn looked at the thing that had no number. It was beautiful in the way a cliff is beautiful, which is to say, it did not care whether anyone found it beautiful. The hull was not smooth. It was built, layer on layer, plate over plate, a surface so dense with structure that the eye could not rest on any one part of it. There were towers along its spine, and the towers had towers. There were batteries set into the plating in rows she stopped counting at 200. There was weathering on it, real weathering, the long gray scarring of a hull that had been somewhere terrible and come back. And the scarring was not damage. It was record. Every mark on that ship was a thing the ship had survived and had chosen not to repair, because repairing it would have erased it. That detail caught at her. The Empire repaired its hulls. A scar was a flaw, a thing to be smoothed and forgotten. This ship wore its scars on purpose. This ship kept things. And along the prow, in raised metal letters 2 stories tall, was a name. The buoy's translator chewed on it and produced a string the registry could read, and the string was not in any of the Empire's 11,000 catalogued languages. It was in the contact's own tongue, and the contact had been confident enough to write its name where anyone could see it, which no warship in the catalog had done in 300 years, because writing your name where the registry could read it was how the registry found you. The galaxy had learned to go nameless. This ship had not. This ship wanted to be read. Tarn felt the cold then, the specific cold of a librarian who has just understood that the book is reading her back. "Archivist," Pell said softly. "The name." The translator finished the name. She turned. The string sat on the screen, rendered into Tesserine script, and it was short, and it was plain, and it landed in her chest like a dropped stone. The ship was called Long Memory. Tarn had spent her life believing that to be catalogued was to be controlled, that the Empire's power was knowing, that a thing measured was a thing owned. She had filed 41,000 hulls under that belief, and she had been right 41,000 times, and being right 41,000 times is the most dangerous thing that can happen to a mind, because it stops the mind from imagining the time it will be wrong. The charcoal ship had a name that said it remembered. It had scarring that said it had survived. It had a rank the scale could not print, a drive the files could not explain, and a heading aimed straight at the planet where all the files were kept. And it had answered every question the registry asked with silence, because it was not the one being questioned. "It's not here to be filed," Tarn said. She heard her own voice as if from across the room. "It's here to read us." Pell looked at her the way the young look at the first true thing they are told. "Ships don't read empires," he said. "No," Tarn said. "They never have. That's why we stopped expecting it. That's why we built a library with weapons instead of a navy with eyes. We taught the whole galaxy that being seen by us was the most dangerous thing that could happen to it." She watched the name burn slowly across the wall, 2 stories of confident metal. And out there, all this time, someone decided the most dangerous thing they could do was let us see them coming. On the long wall, the contact adjusted its heading by 1 final degree, locked it, and began to accelerate. The velocity field climbed past the number the registry's files said was the maximum a crude hull could endure. It kept climbing. The buoy logged the new figure with the small mechanical honesty of a machine that did not know it was watching the end of something. The figure was not the kind of number that astonishes. It was worse. It was a number the files said was impossible, printed plainly, as if impossibility were a thing the charcoal hull had measured once, long ago, and decided not to be bound by. The Empire had a scale that ran to 900 and could not reach this ship. The Empire had propulsion files that named a maximum and could not match this drive. Everywhere Tarn looked, the catalog ended before the charcoal hull began, and the gap between where the catalog ended and where the ship was, that gap was the Empire's whole future, and it was widening by the second. Velu Tarn watched the impossible ship come, and for the first time in 800 years, the catalog had nothing to say. The most complete record in the galaxy, the thing that had ended 40 wars without a shot, sat silent before a hull with a name on its prow, and the silence was the loudest thing in the survey hall, because the silence was the sound of the Empire discovering the edge of itself. The High Registrar arrived in the survey hall with sleep still on him, and certainty already in his voice, which was the order Tesserine power always came in. His name was Orun Dax, and he had governed the catalog for 60 years, and he had never once seen the rank field come back blank. He saw it now, and he did what powerful beings do when the world stops obeying. He decided the world was wrong. The buoy is failing, Dax said. Old optics. A miscalibrated mass reading throws the rank algorithm. Recalibrate and re-rank. The buoy is not failing, Tarn said. I checked it twice. The mass reading is clean. The drive reading is clean. The hull is real, and it has a name, and it is 60 light hours out, moving faster than our files say a crewed ship can move. Then our files are incomplete for this hull, Dax said, which is exactly why we will measure it properly and assign it a number, after which it will behave like every other hull that has ever heard its number. He turned to the wider hall, where the night staff had begun to fill the seats, 50 archivists, who had spent their lives believing the same thing he believed. This is a survey problem. Survey problems are solved by surveying. Dispatch the Reach Squadron to intercept and measure at close range. Tarn opened her mouth to say that you did not send ships to measure a thing that had refused to be measured. She closed it. The Reach Squadron was already moving on the tactical wall, 11 Tesserine cutters peeling off their patrol arcs and forming the standard inspection net, a loose sphere that would close around the contact and read it from every angle at once. It was a good formation. It had worked 4,000 times. The cutters were not warships in the way the catalog meant the word. They were measuring instruments with engines, fast and precise, built to get close and read true. And the Empire had not built a true warship in 200 years, because the Empire had not needed one. Why build a sword when your word was enough to make any blade lie down? The squadron crossed the distance the way the catalog did everything, methodically, without haste, certain of the outcome before it arrived. Tarn watched the 11 blue marks slide across the wall toward the single gray one, and felt the wrongness of it, the way you feel a wrong note in a song you have heard your whole life. 11 instruments going out to read a thing that had already decided what it would let them learn. They closed the net at the 8 light hour mark. The contact did not slow, did not turn, did not acknowledge the 11 ships forming a sphere around it. It held its heading for Tessaris, and let them come. Pell whispered that this was good, that a hull holding steady for inspection was a hull that understood it had been caught. Tarn did not answer, because she had spent the last hour watching a ship that wrote its own name on its prow, and she no longer believed it could be caught. You did not catch a thing that had come to you on purpose. You only learned, too late, that it had wanted to be where it was. The cutters reached close range and began to read. The first reading came back from the lead cutter, the Inketh, and it was the hull's armor profile, and it was wrong in a way that made the duty archivist read it aloud twice. The plating was not one material, it was layered, dozens of layers, and between the layers were gaps, and in the gaps the scan found nothing at all, a measured emptiness that the catalog's physics files said could not exist inside a structural member. The armor was built to be read, and to give the reader less the deeper they looked. The catalog had spent 800 years learning that knowing a ship was the same as owning it. The charcoal hull had been built by people who knew that too, and had built a hull that let itself be measured and told you nothing. That's not armor, the duty archivist said. That's a lie made of metal. It's designed to satisfy a scan and starve it at the same time. It's designed by people who have been scanned before, Tarn said. People who learned what we do with the readings. The second reading came from the Insith as well, and it was the weapon count. and the weapon count was the moment the hall went quiet. 2,240 emplacements. Not all of them guns. The scan could not name most of them. It could only count the hard points, the powered ports, the long recessed channels along the spine that radiated heat the way only a charged weapon radiates heat. The registry's largest cataloged warship, the dead Karen flagship that had earned a rank of 900 and cost the Empire a province, had carried 310 emplacements. The charcoal hull carried more than 7 times that, on a frame only twice the size, and it carried them the way a soldier carries scars, without display, as if they were simply the shape the ship had grown into. A junior archivist in the third row, a young one named Iskorin, who would later be the first to write the new training, stood without being asked. Registrar. The Karen flagship took the combined fleets of 3 provinces to bring down. 8 years. We lost more ships than we destroyed, and we counted it a victory because the flagship was gone. That ship had 310 guns. He pointed at the wall, at the gray mark, at the impossible number. What is the plan for a thing with 7 times that? Recalibrate, Dax said again, but quieter now. It was no longer an order. It was a prayer to a god the catalog had just discovered did not exist. It is calibrated, Tarn said. We are reading it correctly. That is the problem. We have never had a problem with reading. We have always had the answer once we read. The catalog never promised to win a fight. It promised that we would never have to fight, because we would always know the number, and the number would always be enough to make the other ship turn around. That promise is what just came back blank. Tarn studied the readings while the hall argued, and she found, in the dense return from the close pass, a detail that no one else had flagged, because it was not a weapon, and not a number, and the catalog had taught the hall to look only for weapons and numbers. The charcoal hull's drive was not running hot. A ship that crossed 60 light hours at a velocity the files called impossible should have been a furnace, venting waste heat in great plumes the scan could read for light minutes. The long memory was cool. Its drive was efficient past the point the Empire's physics allowed, which meant the people who built it had not merely matched the Empire's engineering. They had outgrown it so far that the outgrowing left no trace, the way a grown being leaves no footprints in a room a child once filled. It isn't straining, she said aloud, and the hall quieted to hear her, because by now they had learned that when the archivist who had read the blank field spoke, the next sentence usually broke something. Look at the thermal return. It crossed the reach without effort. Whatever it is doing it the way we walk across a room. We have been measuring its top speed. We never asked whether that was its top speed. I do not think it is. I think it slowed down so we could see it coming. Dax stared at the thermal return for a long moment. Why would a thing that could arrive unseen choose to be seen? Because it does not want to surprise us, Tarn said. A surprise is over quickly. This is not meant to be over quickly. It wants us to watch it approach. It wants the hours. It wants the whole hall to sit here and read it, and find nothing, and understand, slowly, that there is nothing to find, because the understanding is the point. A thing that wanted to destroy us would not give us time to understand. This thing wants the understanding more than it wants the destruction. She turned from the wall, which means destruction is not what it came for, and that should frighten you more than if it were, because we have a file for ships that come to destroy. We have no file at all for a ship that comes to be understood. The hall had no answer for that, and the silence that followed was a different silence than before, the silence of 50 trained minds, each arriving, on their own, at the edge of the same cliff. They had spent their lives believing that the worst thing in the dark was a fleet they had not counted. Now they were learning that the worst thing in the dark was a single ship that had counted them years ago, had counted them so completely that it could afford to slow down and let them watch it come. The Inseth moved in for the close pass, the final reading, the one that would let the catalog assign a number even to a hull this strange. The close pass put the cutter 4 kilometers off the charcoal flank, near enough to read the joints, the seams, the small honest details that told a true history of a true ship. The Inseth's optics turned on the prow, on the towers, on the rows of batteries, and began to log them one by one. The hall watched the data climb, every detail another grain on a scale that had already broken. And the charcoal hull turned its head. Not the whole ship, a single battery on the upper spine. one emplacement out of 2,240, rotated on its mount, and tracked the insect as the cutter made its pass. It did not fire, it tracked. The catalog had a file on tracking. Tracking meant a fire control system had acquired a target and was holding it. The file said that a ship which tracked but did not fire was a ship issuing a warning, and the warning was simple, and the warning was old, and every species in the reach understood it. I see you, and I have chosen not to. 11 cutters, 2,240 emplacements. The charcoal hull had assigned one of them to the entire inspection net, the way a person might raise one finger, and the gesture said everything the silence had not. It said the net was not a threat. It said the 11 instruments were exactly that, instruments. And the charcoal hull had counted them, weighed them, and decided that one battery out of more than 2,000 was the correct amount of attention to spend on the Empire's measuring tools. Pull the squadron back, Tarn said. The squadron will complete the survey, Dax said. The squadron will die, Tarn said, and the hall heard her say it, and the hall went still in the way a room goes still when someone finally says the true thing. Dax rounded on her, 60 years of certainty in his face, and underneath it, for the first time, something Tarn had never seen on a high registrar. The beginning of a doubt he did not have a file for. We do not lose squadrons, Archivist. We have not lost a squadron in 300 years. We do not lose them because we know what we are facing before we face it. That is the catalog. That is the Empire. You are telling me the catalog has met a thing it cannot weigh, and I am telling you that thing does not exist. Because if it exists, then the last 300 years of peace were not strength. They were luck, and I will not believe that the Empire's peace was luck. It was, Tarn thought, the most honest thing the High Registrar had ever said. It was also the moment she understood that he would lose the squadron to keep his belief, because the belief was the Empire, and a being will spend a great deal to keep his empire. Some beings will spend the empire itself. Then face this, she said, and she did the thing an archivist is trained never to do, which is to argue from a thing not yet in the file. We have measured 41,000 hulls. Every one of them, when we read it its number, did one of three things. It submitted. It ran. It died. 3 responses. 800 years. 3 responses. And we filed every ship under one of them. And we called that knowing the galaxy. That ship out there has done a 4th thing. It has let us read it, and given us nothing, and turned 1 gun on 11, and kept its heading. There is no file for the 4th thing, Registrar. Because in 800 years, nothing has ever had the strength to do it. The catalog does not have a 4th response, and a thing that can do what the catalog has no response for is a thing the catalog cannot stop. For a moment, in the silence after she finished, she thought he might hear it. Then the High Registrar set his jaw, because hearing it would have meant the end of everything he was, and he said the words that sent the cutters in. Complete the survey. The insect turned for its final pass. What happened next? The buoy logged, and the dead cutter logged, and the survivors carried home, and for the rest of Tesserine history, it would be argued whether the charcoal hull had given them a chance or simply taken its measurements first. The long memory broadcast. For the first time since the contact began, it spoke, and it spoke not in its own tongue, but in flawless Tesserine, in the formal hailing protocol, the very protocol the Empire used to end wars without firing. It transmitted the squadron's measured dimensions, their mass, their drive class, and the rank the registry would assign such hulls. It had read them. In the time the cutters spent reading it, it had read all 11 of them, and it had run the catalog's own math on the catalog's own ships, and it had assigned each cutter a number, and the numbers were low, the lowest the scale produced, the rank the catalog reserved for unarmed survey craft and pleasure barges. The charcoal hull had weighed the Empire's measuring instruments and filed them as instruments, harmless, beneath notice, and then it had transmitted the file to them so they would know exactly what they were. The registry had spent 800 years teaching the galaxy that to be ranked was to be controlled. The long memory had just ranked the rankers. It used our protocol, Pell said, very quietly. It told them their number. It told them our number, Tarn said. It just started with the 11 nearest. In the survey hall, 50 archivists watched their own weapon turned around in the hand of something that should not exist, and a few of them began, for the first time in their careers, to be afraid not of the contact, but of the thing the contact implied, that somewhere out in the dark, while the Empire catalogued the galaxy, someone had been cataloging the Empire, that the silence had not been ignorance, that the charcoal hull had not stumbled into tesserine space, lost and unmeasured. It had come on purpose, named and scarred and armed past the top of the scale, straight toward the planet where the files were kept, and it had spent its first words proving it could do to the Empire exactly what the Empire did to everyone else. There is a particular terror in seeing your own method used against you, because it is the terror of discovering that the thing you thought made you safe is a thing anyone could pick up. The catalog had felt, to the Empire, like a law of nature. To the charcoal hull it had been a tool the Empire had left lying in plain sight for 800 years, and the charcoal hull had picked it up. The Inseth's captain, an archivist officer named Sen Overlu, who had measured 900 hulls in her life, did the thing her training told her to do, which was to break off the survey and bring the data home. It was the correct thing. It saved the squadron. It also meant that the charcoal hull's first act in tesserine space had been to make a tesserine squadron retreat, and the catalog had no file for that either, because the catalog's ships did not retreat. Other ships retreated. That was the order of things. The Empire stood and read the number, and the other ship retreated. The arrow had only ever pointed one way. Now the arrow pointed at Tessaris, and the Empire's own squadron was the thing in retreat, and Sen Ovrelu brought 11 cutters home in good order, with the worst news the catalog had received in 300 years, and she did it without losing a single ship. And that too would be argued about for the rest of Tesserine history, because a being who reads the situation correctly and saves her people is a hero in every account except the catalogs, and the catalog had no heading under which to file a captain whose great achievement was knowing when not to fight. Dax stood at the tactical wall and watched his squadron come home in good order with bad news, and Velu Tarn watched the High Registrar, and she saw the exact moment the doubt finished forming in him. It was not when the rank field came back blank. It was not when the weapon count came in. It was when the charcoal hull used the Empire's own protocol against the Empire, because that was the moment Orun Dax understood that the thing coming toward Tessaris was not a problem the catalog could solve. The catalog was the problem the charcoal hull had come to solve. He sat down. The hull had never seen him sit during a survey. He sat in the duty chair like a being whose strings had been cut, and he looked at the gray mark holding its course for the heart of his empire, and he said, "Not to Tarn, not to the hall, but to the dark beyond the wall. We did something to them." Registrar? A ship does not learn a language that well by chance. A ship does not learn our protocol, our scale, our method, our exact way of filing the harmless, unless it spent a very long time studying the one thing it intended to undo. You do not study an empire for its own sake. You study it the way a healer studies a poison. He turned his head, and his eyes found Tarn's, and there was something in them that had not been there at the start of the night, the first crack in 60 years of certainty, and through the crack she could see, very faintly, the beginning of fear. We did something to these people, long ago, something we filed and forgot, the way we file and forget everything beneath 900, and they did not forget. They named a warship after the not forgetting, and they built it to find us. He looked back at the wall. "Find the file, archivist. Whatever we did, it is in there. It is always in there. That is the curse of a catalog. It remembers even the things you would give the Empire to forget." On the long wall, the long memory adjusted nothing, because it had nothing to adjust. It simply continued, scarred and named and unranked, toward the heart of a thing that had spent 800 years certain it could not be surprised, and was now, in every reading the buoy returned, becoming surprised in real time. The velocity field held its impossible figure. The weapon count held its impossible count. The name held its place on the prow, 2 stories of confident metal, and the empire that had taught the galaxy to go nameless watched the one ship that had refused the lesson come to collect. Tarn pulled the survey footage one more time and looked at the 2-story name on the prow, and she thought about what it meant to call a warship long memory. It meant the ship remembered. It meant the people who built it remembered. It meant that somewhere in the unmeasured dark, a species the catalog had never filed had been keeping a memory long enough and patient enough to bring it here, scarred and armed and silent, to a planet that had forgotten it owed anyone anything. The Empire had a memory too. It was 41,000 files long, and in all of it, in 800 years of measuring the galaxy, there was not one entry for the ship that was coming. That was the thing that frightened Velutarn most. Not the weapons, not the speed, the blank. The Empire's whole strength was knowing, and a thing was coming that the Empire did not know, had never known, could not have known, and the not knowing was a hole in the world, and the charcoal hull was pouring through it. She set her hands on the panel and began the search the High Registrar had ordered, down into the bottom of the catalog, into the low files, the harmless files, the entries logged once and never read again, because that, she already suspected, was where the Empire kept the things that would end it, in the same place it kept everything it had decided did not matter. She thought, as she opened the low files, of the surveyors who had built the catalog in its first century, the ambitious ones, the ones who had believed that a galaxy fully measured was a galaxy made safe. They had not been cruel. That was the part she could not stop turning over. Cruelty would have been easier to forgive, because cruelty at least sees its victim. The surveyors had not seen anyone. They had measured, and ranked, and moved on, and felt the clean satisfaction of work done well. And somewhere in that century of clean satisfaction was the entry she was hunting for now, an entry written by a being who had gone home that night content, who had filed a true reading and a fair number, and slept without dreaming, and who could not have imagined that the number would still be drawing breath 1,100 years later, would have grown a hull around it, and a fleet behind it, and a name across its prow, and would be, at this moment, closing on the hall where his clean satisfaction was still on file. The archive world Tessaris had no walls, because for 300 years it had not needed any. Its defense was the catalog. Any fleet that approached was met, read, and assigned its number, and the number was a door that opened only one way, toward retreat. The planet had grown soft in the way only a thing that has never been threatened can grow soft. Vast white repositories spread across the northern continent, the 11,000 language vaults, the dead file towers, the single great hall where the master index lived, and where the High Registrar now stood watching the unranked hull cross the 40 light-hour line. Velutarn had stopped trying to convince Dax. She had started trying to understand the ship. She did it the only way an archivist knew how. She built a file. Not a registry file, not the official kind with a rank field that came back blank, but her own. A private accounting of every true thing the charcoal hull had shown them, because a being who has spent her life reading hulls believes that even a thing without a number can be understood, if you read it honestly enough. The hull let itself be measured, and gave nothing. That was a choice. It meant the builders knew the Empire measured, and built to be measured without being known. That was not the work of a species that had stumbled in. That was the work of a species that had studied the catalog the way the catalog studied the galaxy. The hull carried 2,240 emplacements, and had fired none. That was a choice too. It meant the ship's purpose was not the squadron, not the buoys, not the cutters. The ship was saving itself. A warship that holds its fire across 40 light hours of provocation is a warship aimed at a single target, and the target was Tessaris. The hull had used the Empire's protocol. That was the choice that told Tarn the most. It meant the builders did not merely want to defeat the catalog, they wanted the catalog to understand that it had been defeated by its own method. There was a grief in that, she thought, or something next to grief. You did not turn a thing's own words back on it unless the words had once been used on you. You did not learn an enemy's language to that depth unless the enemy had once spoken it over you while you were too small to answer. She brought the file to Dax. She did not bring it to argue. She brought it because the planet had 4 hours, and a being deserved to meet its end, understanding it. You think it has a grievance, Dax said. He had aged in the night. The certainty was gone from his face, and something steadier had taken its place. The look of a being who has stopped fighting the truth and started, very late, to listen to it. I think it has a memory, Tarn said. It told us so. It wrote it on the prow. The registry has measured 41,000 hulls. We have never wronged a species capable of building that. We would have filed them. We would have ranked them at 900, and the Empire would have spent a province to be rid of them, the way we did the Karen. He stopped, and the stopping was the sound of a thought arriving that he did not want. Unless we measured them when they were small, Tarn said, and filed them low, and forgot. The hall went very quiet, because that was the one possibility the catalog could not bear. The catalog's power was that it remembered everything. But remembering everything is not the same as understanding everything, and a thing filed at the bottom of the scale is a thing the Empire stops looking at. The registry had 800 years of low-ranked files, harmless species, primitive hulls, contacts logged once and never revisited, tens of thousands of them. The Empire had measured each one when it was small, written down its number, and moved on, secure in the knowledge that a small thing measured stays small. The catalog's flaw was never that it forgot, Tarn said slowly, working it out as she said it, the way an archivist finds the truth by speaking it into the room. The catalog never forgets. That's the danger. We wrote down what these people were on the day we met them, and then we believed the writing instead of watching the people. We filed them as small, and then we treated the file as if it were the species. The file stopped changing. The species did not. Pull the low files, Dax said, and for the first time in the night, his voice held no argument, only the flat command of a being who has decided to look at the thing he has spent his life refusing to look at. Everything we ever ranked under 50, cross-reference for the hull language on that prow, the script, the metallurgy, the drive harmonics. If we ever saw these people, it's in the bottom of the catalog where we stopped looking. It took the staff 90 minutes, and in the 90 minutes, the charcoal hull crossed from 40 light hours to 12, still holding fire, still silent, still named. Pell found it. He found it in a survey log, 1100 years old, older than the catalog's 3 centuries of peace, from the era when the registry was still building itself, still measuring its first 1,000 hulls, and learning that measuring was power. The log recorded a contact at the far edge of the Osun Reach. A single vessel, crude, slow, by the standards of the day, 200 meters, lightly armed. The surveyor who measured it had assigned it a rank of 9, near the very bottom of the scale, and had written a note in the margin, the kind of note surveyors wrote when a contact bored them. The note said, "Primitive Deathworld stock, sublight only, no threat, no follow-up required." And beneath it, in the same log, the reason there had been no follow-up. The registry, in those early ambitious years, had been clearing the reach of low-ranked contacts to make room for the lanes. It had not negotiated with the rank 9 vessel. It had not readied its number. The vessel had been small and slow and beneath notice, and the Empire had been young and certain, and the Empire had simply removed it, the way you clear brush, and logged the removal as a routine survey action, and assigned the cleared system a new designation, and moved on. The log did not dwell on it. That was the part Tarn would remember longest. The entry was 4 lines, the clearing of a homeworld, the ending of every ship and station and life a species had, rendered in 4 lines of survey shorthand, between a note about lane width and a note about a mineral claim. The Empire had not hated them. Hatred would have meant the Empire had seen them. The Empire had simply found them in the way, and had moved them, the way a road crew moves a stone, and had felt nothing, because you do not feel anything about a stone. The system's old name was in the log, the name the rank 9 crew had used for their own star. Tarn read it. Then she read the name on the prow of the charcoal hull, the name the translator had rendered, long memory, and she understood that the ship had not been named for a poem. It had been named for a promise. 1100 years, Dax said. He said it the way a being says a number he cannot fit inside himself. They were rank 9. We cleared them like brush, and they remembered for 1100 years. They didn't just remember, Tarn said. They studied. Look at the hull. It's built to be measured and give nothing. They learned exactly how we work. They spent 1100 years building a ship for one purpose, to come back to the people who filed them at the bottom of the scale and were too certain to look twice, and to prove that the bottom of the scale is where the Empire keeps the things that will end it. Isis Korin, the junior who had stood in the survey hall, spoke from the back, and his voice shook, not with fear now, but with the harder thing that comes after fear, the understanding of one's own house. We didn't even kill them all. We thought we did. We cleared the system and filed it cleared. But the log says 1 vessel. We measured 1 vessel at the homeworld. They had a ship out, somewhere, when we came. A single rank 9 ship, sublight only, no threat. It survived. It went into the dark with the memory of a homeworld that the Empire had erased in 4 lines, and it carried that memory until it could build the thing that would carry it back. "One ship," Tarn said. "We cleared a species and missed one ship. And the one ship we missed is the reason there is a fleet at our door, 1100 years later." She looked at the Master Index, the great glowing column of everything the Empire knew, and she felt the full weight of it, not as power, but as evidence. 800 years of the Empire writing down its certainties and believing them. That is the lesson the catalog never learned. You can measure a ship. You cannot measure a memory, and a memory survives in a single hull the way a fire survives in a single coal. Tarn pulled the old surveyor's name from the log, because the catalog kept even that, even the hand that had written the 4 lines. The name meant nothing to her. He had been dead 1,000 years. He had done his work, and been promoted and trained others, and died honored, a builder of the Empire, and his name sat on the entry like a small monument to a competence that had cost a world. She thought about deleting it. She did not. The long memory would want it there, she realized. The long memory would want the name exactly where it was, because a crime with no author is only an accident, and these people had not crossed 1100 years to be told their ending was an accident. They had come to be told it had a hand and a name, and that the hand had felt nothing, and that the Empire had honored the hand for the feeling nothing. That was the wound, not the clearing, the contentment afterward. The charcoal hull crossed the 8 light hour line, the line where the squadron had read it, and this time there was no squadron, because Dax had finally given the order Tarn had asked for at the start. He had pulled everything back. Every cutter, every survey craft, every armed hull in the system, drawn into a tight defensive ring over Tesseris, 210 ships, the largest concentration of Tesserine force assembled in 3 centuries. It was, Tarn knew, exactly the wrong thing, and Dax knew it too, and he had done it anyway, because there was nothing right left to do. You could not read your way out of a thing that had read you first. You could not assign a number to a hull whose builders had spent 1100 years learning to be unnumbered. The catalog, the Empire's one weapon, had already failed in the survey hall when the rank field came back blank. Everything since was just the Empire discovering, layer by layer, exactly how completely it had failed. 210 ships, Dax said, looking at the ring. Do you know how many of them are built to fight, Archivist? Not to measure, to fight. Tell me. None of them. The High Registrar said it without flinching, which was the closest thing to courage the catalog had left him. We have not built a warship in 200 years. We have built instruments. Fast ones, precise ones, the finest survey craft in the galaxy. And not one of them was ever meant to face a thing that did not turn around when it heard its number. We disarmed ourselves, Archivist, slowly, over 3 centuries, and we called it peace, and the whole time the disarming was only safe because no one had ever called our bluff. The catalog was a closed fist that never had to open, because everyone believed there was a stone inside it. He closed his own hand, slowly, and opened it, empty. There was never a stone, there was only the belief, and that ship out there stopped believing 1100 years ago. The charcoal hull crossed the line, and the ring waited. 210 instruments arranged to fight a battle none of them had been built for, and Velu Tarn understood that she was about to watch the catalog meet the one thing it had spent 800 years ensuring it would never have to meet, which was a fair test of whether the fist had ever held a stone. It will use our protocol again, Tarn said. When it reaches the ring, it will read the 210 ships and assign them their numbers and transmit the file, the way it did to the squadron. It will make us watch ourselves be ranked. She was right about the protocol. She was wrong about what the charcoal hull would do with it. The long memory reached the edge of the defensive ring, at a velocity the files still insisted no crude hull could survive, and it slowed for the first time since the contact began. It slowed the way a vast thing slows, with no drama, the velocity field unwinding, degree by degree, until the charcoal hull hung just outside the ring, 1900 meters of scarred and named metal, facing 210 ships that had been built to measure and had never once been built to fight. And then it broadcast. It broadcast in Tesserine, in the formal protocol, and the hall braced for the file, for the 210 numbers, for the humiliation of being ranked by their own method. The file did not come. Instead, the charcoal hull transmitted a single document, and the document was old, and the document was tesserine, because the charcoal hull had been in the catalog before it had a ship, because the charcoal hull's builders had spent 1100 years learning the Empire well enough to reach into the Empire's own archive and take back the one file that mattered. It was the survey log, the 1100-year-old log, the rank 9 entry, the margin note. Primitive Deathworld stock, sublight only, no threat, no follow-up required. The Empire's own words, in the Empire's own hand, the record of the morning the registry had cleared a small, slow ship like brush, and not bothered to read it its number. The long memory transmitted the Empire's forgotten crime back to the Empire, in the Empire's own language, and then it transmitted 3 words after it, the only words it added, and the 3 words were not a threat. They were worse than a threat. They were a citation. The 3 words were, follow-up required. In the Great Hall of the Master Index, on the planet that held every file the galaxy had ever generated, Acetoon Dax read the Empire's own dismissal of the people now hanging outside his defensive ring, and Velu Tarn watched the High Registrar of the Tesserine Registry finally, completely, understand. Not that they would lose. He had understood that hours ago. He understood now, the shape of it, the awful symmetry of it, that the charcoal hull had not come to conquer or to plunder, or even, simply, to destroy. It had come to amend a file. It had come to take an entry the Empire had marked closed 1100 years ago, and write, at the bottom, in the Empire's own format, the line the Empire had been too certain to write itself. The catalog was about to be corrected, and the correction was a warship. They are not even angry, Dax said. He sounded almost lost. Anger I could file. Anger has a response. They are not angry, archivist. They are precise. They are doing this exactly the way we would do it. They are citing the regulation. They are noting the omission. They are completing the file. He laughed once, a short broken sound that had no humor in it. We taught them this. We taught them that the worst thing one being can do to another is not to hate them. It is to file them and move on. And they have come 1100 years to do it back to us, by the regulation, with the citation attached. How long? Dax said. It's already here, Tarn said. It's been here for 1100 years. We just stopped looking at the part of the file where it was written down. The charcoal hull held outside the ring for 1 full minute, the way a librarian holds a finger on a page before turning it, and the 2,240 emplacements along its scarred spine began, one by one, to wake. The first emplacement fired, and the catalog learned what it had refused to weigh. The shot did not look like a weapon. It looked like a correction. A single lance of pale light crossed the 8 kilometers between the charcoal hull and the leading ship of the defensive ring, the cutter Vassin, and the Vassin did not explode. It came apart along its seams, every joint the Empire had welded opening at once, as if the shot had not struck the ship, but had simply read it down to its construction, and then unmade the construction in the order it had been built. The cutter became a cloud of its own components, 2,000 catalogued parts drifting in the configuration of a ship that no longer was one, and the cloud's drift logged itself automatically to the master index, which filed the Vassin, with mechanical honesty, as dead. In the Great Hall, the dead file counter advanced by 1 for the first time in 300 years. That was 1, Velu Tarn said. It has 2,239 more. The defensive ring did the only thing it knew how to do. It read the charcoal hull and transmitted its rank. The full weight of the catalog, 210 ships broadcasting in unison, the formal protocol that had ended 40 wars, telling the long memory its number, demanding it understand the number, and behave the way numbered things behaved. The long memory had no number. The protocol broke against it, the way a wave breaks against a cliff, with great noise and no effect, and the charcoal hull answered the broadcast by firing 11 more emplacements, and 11 more ships of the ring came apart at their seams, and the dead file counter advanced by 11, and the Great Hall, which had not heard a shot fired in anger in the lifetime of anyone in it, learned the sound of its own certainty failing. It was not chaos. That was the thing Tarn would remember. It was the opposite of chaos. The charcoal hull fought the way the catalog filed, methodically, in order, without waste. It did not spray fire across the ring. It selected. It read each ship, assigned it the place in the sequence its construction merited, and corrected it. The Empire had spent 800 years believing that to measure a thing was to master it, and now a thing was measuring the Empire's ships one by one, and mastering each in the instant after it finished reading. A duty officer at the tactical wall was calling the losses aloud, the way the catalog called everything aloud, by the number, and the numbers came faster than he could keep his voice level. The Tesserine ring tried what little it had. It fired. The cutters carried light defensive armament, enough to wave off a raider, and they used it now, hundreds of small bright weapons converging on the charcoal hull, and the catalog watched its own fire reach the scarred plating and do, to the layered armor that gave a scan less the deeper it looked, almost nothing at all. The shots struck and scattered. The hull did not so much as roll. 800 years of disarmament, 3 centuries of building instruments instead of weapons, all of it arriving at a single fact on the tactical wall. The Empire's entire combined fire could not mark the paint on the ship it had filed at 9, and cleared like brush. Sen Ovrelu, the archivist officer whose squadron the long memory had spared, was in the ring now, aboard a heavier cutter, and she did the only intelligent thing anyone did in those minutes. She stopped broadcasting the rank. She understood, faster than the High Registrar had, that the protocol was not a weapon against this hull, that telling the long memory its number only gave the long memory more of the Empire's voice to turn around. She ordered her section to go silent and to move, to break the neat geometry of the ring, to stop being a thing arranged to be read. It bought her section 90 seconds. In a battle the catalog had no file for, 90 seconds of unfiled survival was the closest thing to victory anyone on the Tesserine side would achieve, and Sen Ovrelu earned it by being the first archivist in 300 years to understand that the Empire's strength had become its weakness, that being legible was being targeted, that the catalog had built a civilization optimized to be read by exactly the kind of thing now reading it. She broke the formation, Pell breathed, watching the marks scatter. She stopped transmitting. Registrar, she stopped transmitting, and they lived. Of course they lived, Dax said softly. We taught the galaxy that to be seen by us was to be at our mercy. We never imagined being seen could be the danger. She unlearned in 90 seconds what we built the Empire on. His eyes did not leave the wall. Log her section. Whatever survives this, log every ship that went silent and moved. They are the only Tesserine vessels in 800 years that ever faced a thing the catalog could not weigh, and did the right thing. The new Empire, if there is one, will be built by them. 41 ships remained when the duty officer stopped calling the count, not because the count had ended, but because his voice had finally failed him, and into the silence came a thing no one in the hall had ever heard, which was the sound of the master index revising its own legend. The scale that had run from 1 to 900 for 800 years rewrote its upper bound in real time, the way an instrument rewrites itself when it meets a force it was never built to read. And the new bound was not a number, it was a name. The index, unable to find a value large enough for the thing dismantling the ring, did what the catalog had taught it never to do, and entered, at the top of the scale, above 900, above every flagship and dreadnought and world-ender the Empire had ever weighed, a single proper noun, long memory. Tarn watched the Empire's own measuring system surrender the top of its own scale to the ship, and she understood that the catalog had just done, to itself, the only honest thing it had ever done. It had admitted that there was a thing it could not number, and it had written the thing's name where the number should have gone. The long memory let her section run. It was not pursuing survivors. Tarn watched the targeting pattern resolve on the tactical wall, and understood, with the cold clarity of an archivist who has finally read a hull correctly, that the charcoal ship was not trying to destroy the Tesserine fleet at all. It was clearing a path. Every ship it corrected was a ship between itself and the master index, the Great Hall, the planet's surface, the place where the file lived. It was doing now, on a planetary scale, exactly what the Empire had done to its people 1100 years ago. It was clearing brush, and it was logging each removal, Tarn realized, transmitting each correction back to the master index in the Empire's own survey format, so that the catalog would record its own dismantling in its own hand. That was the part that made her sit down. The long memory was not simply destroying the ring. It was filing the destruction. Each cutter that came apart arrived at the master index a half-second later as a formal survey entry, dimensions, mass, drive class, rank, and a closing note. And the closing note on every one of them was the same. Cleared. No follow-up required. The charcoal hull was returning the Empire's own words to the Empire one ship at a time. The exact phrase the surveyor had written over a homeworld 1100 years ago. And the master index, which could not refuse a properly formatted entry in its own protocol, was accepting every one of them and writing them into the permanent record of Thesaurus, so that for as long as the catalog existed, it would carry, in its own hand, the account of the day it learned what its own dismissals had felt like from below. "It's teaching us," Tarn said. "It's not punishing us, it's teaching us, in the only language we ever respected, which is the file. It is making the catalog write down how it feels to be cleared." The ring collapsed inward, ships dying in sequence, the path opening. 210 became 140 became 80. The High Registrar stood before the Master Index, with his 60 years of certainty entirely gone, and he did a thing that no High Registrar had ever done, a thing the catalog had no protocol for, a thing that would itself have to be filed under a new heading the Empire did not yet have. He surrendered the catalog. Not the Empire, not the planet, the catalog itself. He keyed the master index to open, and he transmitted to the charcoal hull, in the formal protocol, the Empire's whole strength laid bare. Every file, 41,000 hulls, 800 years of measuring the galaxy. He offered it all, freely, in exchange for the planet, because Orun Dax had finally understood the one thing the catalog had never taught him, which was that there were things in the dark larger than the things you had measured, and that a being who has built his whole house on knowing must, when he meets the thing he does not know, choose between his house and his life. "What are you doing?" Tarn said, though she could see exactly what he was doing. "The only honest thing left," Dax said, his hands moving over the index, opening 800 years of locked record. "It came for a file. It can have all of them. Every species we filed and forgot. Every system we cleared. Every line we wrote and never read again. If memory is what they came for, then let them have the whole memory, ours included, especially ours, the parts we kept hidden even from ourselves. Maybe a people who valued one file enough to cross 1100 years will know what to do with the rest of them. We never did. We only ever knew how to keep them." The long memory received the master index. It did not stop firing, but it changed its fire. Tarn saw the pattern shift on the tactical wall, saw the charcoal hull begin to avoid the repositories, the language vaults, the dead file towers, threading its corrections around the archive itself, and she understood that the long memory had accepted the surrender of the catalog, and that the catalog was the thing it had come for, and that it had no quarrel with the white repositories full of every other species' history, only with the entry that concerned its own. "It's reading the index," Pell whispered. He was watching the data flow, the master index pouring up the charcoal hull's receiver, 800 years of files crossing the gap in minutes. "It's reading all of it." "It already knows all of it," Tarn said. "It studied us for 1100 years. It's not reading the index to learn. It's reading the index to find its own file, to confirm what we wrote, to make sure the line is exactly as the surveyor left it before it writes the correction." She was right. The master index logged, with its mechanical honesty, the access pattern of the receiving ship, and the access pattern was a search, and the search resolved on a single entry, the 1100-year-old survey log, the rank 9 vessel, the margin note, primitive Deathworld stock, no follow-up required. The long memory found its own dismissal in the Empire's archive, the original, the source. And it held there. And for 11 seconds the charcoal hull fired nothing at all, and the great hall held its breath. 210 ships down to 51, the path to the surface almost clear. 11 seconds. Tarn counted them. She would count them for the rest of her life. 11 seconds in which the most powerful warship the galaxy had ever produced did nothing at all but look at 4 lines of survey shorthand that an empire had written over its homeworld, and she thought, watching it, that the 11 seconds were the truest thing she had ever witnessed, because they were not the silence of a weapon choosing its next target. They were the silence of a people standing, at last, in front of the words that had ended them, in the place those words were kept, after 1100 years of carrying the wound through the dark. The whole voyage had been for these 11 seconds. The fleet, the ship, the patience, all of it, so that someone could stand here and read the line. Then the long memory amended the file. It did not delete it. That was the part Tarn would carry for the rest of her life, the part that told her exactly what kind of people had built the charcoal hull. It did not erase the surveyor's dismissal. It did not rewrite the margin note. It left the Empire's crime intact, word for word, primitive Deathworld stock, sublight only, no threat. Because to erase it would have been to let the Empire forget again, and forgetting was the whole crime. Instead it added, beneath the original entry, in the Empire's own survey format, a follow-up, a second measurement, a new reading of the same people, 1100 years later, taken by the people themselves, of themselves, in the Empire's own units, on the Empire's own scale. The new rank field did not come back blank. The long memory had built its own ship a number, and the number it assigned itself, in the Empire's catalog, in the Empire's hand, was not 900. It was a figure the scale had never been built to hold, written out in full, because no single value could contain it, and after the number the charcoal hull added the surveyor's own phrase, turned now into its true and final meaning. Follow-up complete. The 51 remaining ships of the defensive ring held their positions, no longer firing, because there was no longer anything to fire at that mattered. The path to Thesaurus was open, the master index was surrendered, the file was amended, and the charcoal hull, 1900 meters of scar and memory, hung above the archive world it could have ended in an afternoon, and did not end it. It had not come to end the Empire. Velutarn understood that, now with the total clarity of a being who has finally read a hull all the way to the bottom. It had come to be filed correctly. 1100 years of patience, a ship built to outweigh the scale, a voyage across the dark to the one planet that held the lie, all of it for a single line in a single log, the line the Empire had been too certain to write. The long memory had wanted, more than conquest, more than revenge, the one thing the Empire had denied its people when it cleared them like brush. It had wanted to be measured honestly, and it had been forced, in the end, to come back and do the measuring itself, because the Empire never would have. It's not going to land, Tarn said. It's not going to take the planet. It already took the only thing it came for. On the tactical wall, the long memory began, slowly, to turn. Not in retreat, the catalog would note, because a hull that has accomplished its purpose and chosen to leave is not retreating, and the surveyor who logged this day would be very careful about the distinction, having learned at last what careless filing costs. The charcoal hull came about, its scarred flank rolling across the starlight, the two-story name on its prow catching the light of the Empire's sun, and it set its nose back toward the unmeasured dark it had come from, toward the Osun Reach, toward the cleared system with the Empire's new designation and the old name no one had spoken in 1100 years. Orun Dax watched the ship that had unmade his certainty begin to leave, and he asked the only question the catalog had left him, the question that had haunted the survey hall since the first reading came back blank. What were they, he said. What were they, that we filed at 9 and cleared like brush? And the master index, which had just been corrected by their own hand, held the answer now, the follow-up entry, the honest measurement, and Velutarn read it aloud, because the High Registrar deserved to hear it, and because it was, she thought, the truest thing the catalog had recorded in 800 years. They were us, she said, if we had ever once been wronged the way we wronged them, and had remembered it as long as they did. They were a small, slow ship at the bottom of the scale, and we taught them, 1100 years ago, the one thing the catalog could not measure. We taught them that being forgotten is survivable, and they spent every year since learning to come back. The charcoal hull was 11 light hours out, and still leaving when the second contact appeared on the survey buoy, and the second contact made Velutarn understand that the worst thing had not yet happened. There were more of them. The buoy logged the new arrivals at the edge of the Osun Reach, where the long memory had entered, and the count climbed the way a tide climbs, not in a rush but without stopping. 4, 11, 40. The deep scan read them, and the readings came back the same as the first: charcoal hulls, named hulls, scarred hulls, rank fields blank, and the survey hall, which had spent the night learning to be afraid of one ship, learned now to be afraid of a people. "Stop the count," Dax said. He was very quiet. He had nothing left to be loud with. "I do not want the count." "You need the count," Tarn said. "You are the catalog. The count is the only thing we have ever had." The count reached 200, and held there, 200 charcoal hulls hanging at the edge of the reach in a loose formation that no Tesserine file had a name for, and not one of them advanced past the line the long memory had crossed. They held. They had not come to follow their flagship into the archive world. They had come to witness. 200 scarred and named warships, a fleet the catalog could not weigh, assembled at the edge of Tesserine space, for the single purpose of watching one of their own go home with the file corrected. Tarn read the names as the buoy resolved them, one by one, the translator chewing through a tongue the catalog had no entry for. "Cold Patience, the star we lost. 4 lines. That one stopped her, 4 lines. A warship named for the length of the entry that had erased its builder's world. And she understood then that the fleet was not a fleet in the way the catalog meant the word. It was a memorial that could move. Every hull carried a piece of the wound, written into the name where anyone could read it, the way the Empire had taught the galaxy never to do, and the people who built these ships had decided that the Empire's lesson was exactly the thing to refuse. The galaxy went nameless to hide from the catalog. This people went named, 2 stories tall, so that the catalog could never again pretend it had not seen them. The long memory broadcast one last time as it reached them. Tarn caught it on the buoy, the formal Tesserine protocol again, but turned now to a use the Empire had never imagined for it, because the protocol had always been a way to end a war by telling a fleet its number, and the long memory used it instead to tell 200 ships that the work was done. It transmitted the amended file, the original dismissal, the surveyor's note, primitive Death World stock, no follow-up required, and beneath it, the follow-up, the honest measurement, the number the scale could not hold, and the final line, follow-up complete. And the 200 charcoal hulls, reading the file, did a thing that the buoy logged and that Velu Tarn would spend the rest of her life unable to forget. They lit their drives, all 200 at once, a wall of pale light at the edge of the dark, and they turned, in perfect order, and they began to leave. Before the last of the charcoal hulls slipped past the buoy, one of them did a thing the others did not, and it was the long memory itself, the flagship, turning its scarred flank one final time toward the planet it was leaving. Tarn watched it on the wall and held her breath, because a ship that turns back is a ship that has remembered something it meant to do, and she did not know what a thing like the long memory might still have left undone. It broadcast once more. Not the protocol this time, not the file. A single transmission in plain Tesserine, short and addressed, the buoy noted with its mechanical honesty, not to the High Registrar, and not to the fleet, but to the Master Index itself, to the catalog, to the thing the ship had crossed 1100 years to correct. The message said, "Keep it accurate." That was all. 2 words. The Empire had built the most complete record in the galaxy, and had let the most important entry in it rot at the bottom of the scale for 1100 years, and the people it had wronged, leaving forever, with the power to end the archive world in an afternoon, spent their last words asking the catalog only to do the one thing a catalog was for: to keep it accurate, not to flatter them, not to fear them, to keep it true. Tarn wrote the 2 words into the file by hand, beneath the follow-up, and she understood that they were not a request. They were the only sentence anywhere in the catalog that had been written by the subject of an entry to the entry itself, and she knew, writing them, that they would outlast everything else on Tessaris, the repositories, and the vaults and the towers, because they were the only words in 800 years of files that told the catalog what it was actually for. The Empire spent the next century learning to obey them. It did not come easily. Certainty is a comfortable thing, and an empire that has been certain for 800 years does not become humble in a season. There were registrars who argued that the night the catalog failed should be sealed, struck from the record, the dead file count rounded off, and the survey log restored to its old 4 lines, because an empire that admits it was beaten by a thing it filed at 9 is an empire that has handed the galaxy a map to its own throat. Dax forbade it with the last authority of his office, and Tarn enforced it after him, and Iskorin after her, because the three of them had stood in the hall and seen the truth, and could not unsee it, that the sealing of the record was the original crime, that the empire had been beaten precisely because it had spent 800 years rounding off the entries it found inconvenient, and that to seal this one would be to guarantee that somewhere in the dark, another small, slow ship was already learning to come back. So the record stayed open. The night the catalog failed became the first thing every archivist read, and the last thing every registrar swore to keep. The empire grew slower and stranger, and, in its slowness, kinder, because a power that has to actually look at the things it once dismissed cannot dismiss them so easily again, and a being who has read the survey log honestly cannot clear a system like Brush, because the log now ends, every copy of it, in 2 words, written by the ship that the clearing made. Keep it accurate. They had not come to conquer Tessaris. They had not come to take the archive world, the language vaults, the repositories full of every species the Empire had ever measured. They had come, 200 warships strong, to make sure their flagship was not alone when it went to amend a file that was 1100 years overdue. The Empire had filed them at 9 and cleared them like Brush and moved on. They had come back as a power the Empire could not measure, and they had touched nothing, taken nothing, demanded nothing, except the correction of a single line, and then they had gone home. It was the most terrifying thing Velutarn had ever seen, and she had spent the night watching a ship unmake a fleet. The terror was not in the weapons, it was in the restraint. A people who could end the archive world, and chose instead to correct a footnote, were a people who had decided, 1100 years ago, exactly what they wanted, and had not let 1 year of patience drift them off it. The Empire had built a catalog to know what every ship wanted, because a thing that wanted could be bargained with. The charcoal hulls had wanted one thing, one small honest thing, and the wanting of it had been so total, and so patient, that the catalog, reading it, finally understood that there had never been anything to bargain with at all. They could have ended us, Pell said. He was looking at the wall of departing light. They had 200 ships. We had 51. They could have ended us, and they corrected a file and left. That is why they could have ended us, Tarn said. A people who only want everything can be stopped, because everything is too much to hold and they overreach. A people who want one thing, and have wanted it for 1100 years, cannot be stopped, because there is nothing in them to overreach. We never had a file for that. We filed wants like prices. Theirs was not a price, it was a promise, and the catalog cannot weigh a promise. The survey hall was silent for a long time after the last charcoal hull crossed the reach line, and the buoy lost it to the dark. The dead file counter had advanced by 159 in a single night, the worst day in the Empire's recorded history, and the Empire had not been conquered, had not been occupied, had not lost a single repository or vault, or even the master index, which Dax had surrendered, and which the long memory had read and returned, unharmed, with one entry corrected. By every measure the catalog used, the Empire had survived, and every being in the survey hall understood that the Empire was over, because the Empire had never been its planet, or its fleet, or its repositories. The Empire had been the certainty that to measure was to master, that a thing filed was a thing owned, that the bottom of the scale was where you kept the things that did not matter. The bottom of the scale was where the Empire had kept the thing that mastered it, and now everyone knew. Iskorin was the one who broke the silence, and what he said was the question that would reshape the Empire. Registrar, how many others? He gestured at the master index, glowing, surrendered, returned. 1100 years. One species came back. How many are still out there that we filed at 9 and cleared and forgot? How many are studying us right now, building, remembering, the way these people did? We can't know. That's the point. We never looked. We filed them at the bottom and stopped looking, and looking is the only thing that would tell us. No one answered, because there was no answer in the catalog, because the catalog could only tell you what you had already measured, and the question was about everything the catalog had measured once and never looked at again. Orun Dax stood before the master index for a long time. Then he did the last thing a high registrar would do, the thing that would define the rest of Tesserine history, the thing that told Velu Tarn that the Empire might, in losing its certainty, have finally found something better. He opened the master index, and he went to the bottom of the scale, to the tens of thousands of low-ranked files, the harmless species, the primitive hulls, the contacts logged once and never revisited, and he flagged every one of them. Follow-up required. All of them, he said. Every species we ever filed at the bottom and stopped looking at. Every contact we cleared because it was small and slow and beneath notice. We will go back. We will read them honestly. We will read them the way we should have read the Rank 9 vessel 1100 years ago, before we cleared their star and logged it as routine. He turned to the hall, to the 50 archivists who had watched the catalog fail and the Empire survive, and his voice was steady, and it was, for the first time in his 60 years, the voice of a being who had learned something. The catalog was never a weapon. We made it one, and it failed the moment it met a thing it could not weigh, because a weapon is only as strong as the things it has not yet faced. But the catalog can be what it was meant to be. A memory, an honest one. We will not be the Empire that knew everything and understood nothing. Not anymore. He gave Sen of Relu command of the new survey. It was the first order of the new Empire, and it was the correct one, because she was the only officer who had faced the unweighable thing and read the situation true, and an Empire learning to look honestly needed, more than anything, beings who knew the difference between a reading and an understanding. She accepted it without ceremony, the way she did everything, and her first act was to take the section of ships that had gone silent and survived, and to rename them, not for victories. The catalog had no victory here, but for the lesson, so that every new survey ship would carry on its hull the thing the Empire had nearly died learning. Velu Tarn began the follow-ups herself, that day, with the Rank 9 entry, the one the long memory had amended. She did not change what the charcoal hull had written. She added beneath it the only thing left to add, the surveyor's true name, her own, and the date, so that the file would show forever who had finally read it correctly, and how long it had taken. 1100 years, 200 warships, and one ship called Long Memory, that crossed the dark to teach a library that the things it stopped looking at did not stop existing. The follow-ups took the rest of her life. She did not finish them. No one would finish them, because there were tens of thousands, and each one was a species, and each species was larger than its file, and the whole point of the work was to stop believing the file and start watching the species. The work had no end, which was, Tarn came to believe, the first honest thing the catalog had ever done. An empire that has finished knowing is an empire that has stopped looking. The follow-ups would run forever, and that was correct, because the galaxy did not stop changing, and a memory that stopped updating was just a grave with good handwriting. Years later, when the Empire had become something else, something that read its low files as carefully as its high ones, that sent envoys instead of survey nets, that had cleared no system in living memory, and would clear none again, the story of the night the catalog failed was told to every new archivist on their first day. It was not told as a defeat. Dax had forbidden that. It was told as a correction. And it ended, always, the same way, with the line Velu Tarn had written at the bottom of the file, and that the catalog now kept at the very top of its training, above the legend, above the scale. The first thing any archivist read before they were trusted to measure anything. The galaxy is full of small, slow ships at the bottom of the scale, and you will never know which of them is remembering. So read them all as if the day will come when one of them returns, named and scarred and unweighable, to ask you, in your own words, why you stopped looking. Tarn lived to be old. She trained Iskorin, and Iskorin trained others, and the training spread until the empire that had once cleared a homeworld in 4 lines became the empire that could not file any being without a living archivist's name attached and a date for the next honest look. It was slower, it was harder. It ended no wars without firing, because the catalog was no longer a fist that everyone believed held a stone, and the empire learned to do the patient, costly, ordinary work of speaking to the galaxy instead of ranking it. The piece that came after was a smaller piece, and a truer one, and it had been bought at the price of the one thing the old empire had loved most, which was its certainty. The long memory was never seen in Tesserine space again. It had no reason to return. The file was correct now, and a people who had wanted only that had no further business with the empire that had finally given it to them. Somewhere out past the Osun Reach, in a system with an old name spoken again, 200 charcoal hulls hung above a star the empire had once cleared like brush, keeping a memory that no longer needed to be carried as a wound, because the wound, at last, had been entered into the record in the hand of the ones who made it. Tarn liked to think they had repaired their ships, that they had finally smoothed the scars they had carried so long. Now that the scars were written down somewhere, the writing would last. She had no way to know. The catalog had no file for it, and she had stopped, in her old age, believing that the absence of a file was the absence of a truth. Some things were real and unmeasured. The charcoal hulls had taught her that. It was the most important thing she ever learned, and the catalog could not hold it. And she taught it anyway, out loud, to every archivist who came after, because the things you cannot file are the only things worth carrying yourself. There was one more thing Tarn did, in the long years after, that she told no one until she was very old. She went, alone, to the Deadfile Towers, and she pulled the records of the 2 ships the catalog had ever ranked, at 900, the Karen flagship and the other, the 2 hulls so dangerous the Empire had spent a province to be rid of each. She read them again with new eyes, and she found, in both, the same thing she had found in the rank 9 vessel, the same thing she had been trained her whole life not to see. The Empire had measured each of them when they were already enemies, already armed, already roused, and had ranked them at the very top of the scale, and had been correct, and the correctness had taught the Empire exactly the wrong lesson. It had taught the Empire to fear the things that were already large. The long memory had been the one true danger in 800 years, and the catalog had filed it at 9, because the catalog only ever learned to fear a thing after it had grown teeth, and never learned, until the night it failed, that the most dangerous thing in the galaxy is not the hull ranked 900. It is the hull ranked 9 that you cleared like brush and never read again, growing, in the dark, into the only number your scale was never built to hold. She closed the towers behind her, and did not pull those files again. She had read what she needed. The Empire had feared the wrong things for 800 years, and the correction of that, she understood, was the whole work of every year she had left, and of every archivist who would come after her, forever, which was exactly as it should be. The catalog held every warship in the galaxy. It had held them for 800 years, and been certain that holding was the same as understanding. Then one hull returned no match, and crossed the dark, and corrected a single line, and left, and taught the keepers of every file the one thing no file had ever held, that the things you forget remember you, and the day they come back, they will not ask to be measured. They will measure you, and the number will be exactly the one you earned.